Hi, my name is Benedict. I woke up to news that Reason Studios had launched or released or let out of the bag a Reason Free, a free version of Reason. Now you've been able to run a trial, but this Reason Free is actually a full VST that you can run in a DAW, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in those who are really interested in running Reason as a DAW, because that's where it's the strongest. Yes, there are cool things about running it inside some other DAW, but the whole idea of Reason Free really, as far as I'm concerned, is running it as a DAW, because that's where you get the true power of Reason. So I'm going to run through setups, how to deal with the limits, because there are some limits. You've only got some of the devices that come inside Reason. Now, one of the great things is that most of Reason's devices are really well thought through. There's one here in particular that I'm not really a fan of, but, well, it can have some uses, I guess. But it's definitely no worse than a lot of VST paid, let alone free. So, what do you get? You can run up to 16 tracks in the full DAW. Remember, I'm not going to talk about it as a plugin inside another DAW. Everyone else is going to talk about that. Boring. You've got Europa. Europa is a wonderful and incredibly powerful synth. I put it up there with Serum. Definitely hold it over all the other freeware synths, the things that top the pile. Surge is a fine instrument, but A, it can't cover the ground that Europa can, and B, it's just nowhere near as easy to use. To me, one of the most important features of something is that it must be easy to use. I don't care if something has a list of 40 million features on tickbox spreadsheets, if you can't use them, because that just makes it, well, completely pointless. Europa is surprisingly easy to use. It's fast, and honestly, if you can't make the kind of sound that you are looking for in there, you just haven't worked it out. Yes, like anything, there is a learning curve. Writing music is sort of easy, sort of incredibly complex. One of the problems is that people rush to the complex before managing the easy. So I'm going to move quickly through certain things and bog down on certain other things. Now, if I'm bogging down on a thing, you're probably going to go, oh, boring, I'll skip this bit. You will die with that. Let me say that again. There is a reason why I'm taking the time and particularly telling you don't do something. Because a lot of the popular do this things are the very reason that those same people are struggling decades later. Not because they lack talent, lack ability, lack interesting ideas, but because they're doing things wrong. Commonly fundamental things. Wrong, or wrong because they just skipped and never learnt them. So we've got Europa, which is wonderful. Kong is a really capable drum-making instrument. It's a synthesizer. It's not a pattern player, but it's a drum-building environment. Incredibly powerful. And before anyone goes, oh, there's no sampler in here, yeah, you've got samplers inside of Kong. ID8, Songwriter's Toolbox, easy to bypass that wee fella, but it's got some basic but nice, very usable pianos. We'll go through all of that. Monotone, it's bass synthesizer. It is limited, but it actually sounds good, and seeing there's really only the one other synth, I'd be happy with that monotone. I'd be happy with Europa for absolutely everything. And maybe swap it for one of the NN samplers, but I get where they're coming from. In terms of effects/processors, there's Scream 4, which is a really wonderful distortion and character unit. You do need to use a little differently than some of the common suspects, but in terms of is it good quality, hell yes, it's very versatile. It can do an awful lot of things. You'll learn to fly it like anything else. The Echo is probably one of the best reverb devices ever put down on the ground. It's got one trade-off, which is that you lose level when you put it in, because technically it's making sure you get the same level. Audiomatic is a strange one, and honestly I don't use it, but hey, they're showing a range. The RV7000, the advanced reverb, is a powerful beast. I'm not a fan of it, but we'll go through alternatives. Yes, in terms of processors, we're a little bit more limited. We've got the M-Class Maximizer, but not as such a compressor. We'll deal with that later, but the M-Class Maximizer is a very, well, classy piece of kit. I have always used it, probably will always use it. In terms of players, you just get one, scales and chords, that you can use to help you manage in a particular key or scale. So if you decide you're going to write in, one of those totally stupid and useless key scales like, D, then you can lock yourself with that. Combinator, well, that's a lure just to really help you get into the power of Reason. Pulsar is getting you into the power of CV connections, and that's a lot of where the Reason DAW really excels over most other things, including running Reason inside another vastly inferior DAW. Don't have a go at me, I have a sense of humour. Spiders, well, they're just useful tools. MIDI out device, well, if you're still afflicted with the idea that the real world sounds better, go for it, I guess. Now, the big question that I've had and haven't been able to see an official answer to is, will Reason Free run VST? Again, I'm only talking the DAW. The plugin never runs VST. It makes no sense. It would become circular and probably explode. Well, maybe it wouldn't, but that's a decision they've made, and there's obviously logic inside it. The only answer that I can get is from AI, and we all know that we should trust AI all the time. No, a lot of the time, especially when it comes to music stuff, it tells you really terrible stuff because AI just takes off the top of the pond, and we all know what floats on top of ponds: scum. So it's possible. Will the DAW run VST? AI says yes. The site doesn't say whether it does, but it also doesn't say that it doesn't. So hopefully it does allow VST, in which case we've got a really, really great structure in the DAW. And where there are gaps, like, say, a compressor, we can fill them. I'm going to talk as though that's the case. If it turns out not to be the case, there are other ways which I'll also try and cover off as we go through. This will probably be a bit long. If you're only prepared to spend 30 seconds and think that you're going to know everything, music is not for you. Please leave now. I'm not asking you to leave my video. I'm asking you to leave music because, believe me, there's a lot to know, and you don't need to know it front of brain. You'll see that I always talk about mindset stuff. Alrighty, I'm going to keep this around and open it out every now and then because try as I could not get Reason Free to run on my machine because I've got a full license of Reason 14. So we'll try and make sure that I stay within those confines. Now, the first thing that you want to do when you launch is to make sure you get your setups right. I won't go through all of them because mostly it's boring and you can make your own decisions and come back later. But the first thing we do with a music environment is get sound out of it. As much as possible, you are going to want to run an ASIO driver. Not that one, sorry, Audient. Don't run the Realtek driver. It's not a real... Well, I guess it may be. To be honest, I've never used it, but it's probably not the smartest choice. The smartest choice is for you to have an audio interface, a USB one. I've got an Audient Evo 4, which is cheap and absolutely great, so long as you don't use it as a football, because it's made of plastic. So that's what you want to use, your ASIO driver. Because I'm doing this as a screen thing, then I have to use the DX driver. Now, DX drivers are generally okay, with the exceptions of, in Reason, you cannot bring in audio. If you don't have an audio interface to plug your microphone into, Reason will not record sound from the outside world. Some people suggest that sucks, but you know what? It's appropriate. Why encourage or even allow people to do something stupid? It'd be a little like a person inventing a gun where the barrel points backwards. It's like, dudes, this is a one-way street. It's not wise. So if you are just making sound, synths inside of Reason Free or Reason or any DAW and pumping it out into the real world, your loudspeakers, don't do this. Really don't do this. I've got a whole video on that. Find it. Headphones are a bad call. I'm only using them to stop feedback. Here, then your DX driver will do okay. You'll have a little bit of latency, as in when you press a note, there'll be a little bit of a gap, but within an hour or less, your body will have adjusted. So don't fuss on things that don't matter. Let this use whatever it has as default numbers if you're using the DX driver. If you are using an ASIO driver, don't push these numbers particularly low. People will go on about, oh, but if it's a millisecond, then we're all going to die. Get over yourselves. Very, very blunt. You've got to go with what is practical. 5, 8, 10 milliseconds, absolutely fine. You get a Roland D50, or definitely some of the later workstations, the slightly bigger, more powerful beasties. 10 milliseconds was not at all uncommon on those, and people didn't stop in the middle of their Bon Jovi concert to go. So don't get bogged down. MIDI. You are going to want to have a MIDI in controller sooner rather than later. Definitely buy at least 4 octaves. I will encourage you to get 5 octaves. It's far better to get an older but still in fine condition, say like a Novation launch key or one of the Nectar, say like an Impact or something like that, with 5 octaves, than it is to buy some fancier name with like 1.5 octaves. It limits you more than you realise. So get 4, if not 5 octaves. More than that, probably unnecessary, unless you happen to be Eddie Van Halen. I mean Eddie Van Halen, because he was actually a fine pianist. Other stuff we're not going to worry about, except for folders, because if Reason Free does allow plugins, then you're going to want to show it where they are. It will have defaulted to on Windows. If you're Apple afflicted, you should know how this works anyway. It'll default to this. If you happen to have older VST 2.4, whatever folder you've got them in, tick that box. I keep all the others unticked so I can't get sort of random stuff come in. Now we're set up to be able to have stuff work. We will look at some of the options. There is a browser which I don't like. So I'm just going to turn it off, because why run with things I don't like? There is the Devices tab. I don't like it over there. You might, up to you. But we do all our work in the rack. So I make sure that my rack is over on the side. You do see I have a very wide screen. I've got an ultra wide because it works well for this, and then just set it to full size. Now you will see that I've got my devices up. You can set it to look for instruments, you can set it to look for effects, utilities or players. Now remember, this is not Reason Free, but the architecture of everything underneath it is exactly the same. Reason Free, from what it says in the website and what have you, is that you'll still see all of the extra things, they'll just be greyed out, so it reminds you that you're missing them. So it will look similar-ish to this, and we can just take a device, drag it out. Woohoo! I have now got a track, I've got the synth, and I can play. That's why we set up the audio first. We don't start doing things and then set up the audio. We set up the audio first so that things work when we want them to work. Great. Before we go any further, I'm going to set up some masters, because it's very easy to do dumb things and go wrong. So in which case, I'm going to go to my mixer, my way of mixing things, and look at Reason. Reason comes with a fully functional, fully featured mixer from the get-go. This is a clone of the workflow of the very famous SSL, which was used for just about everything in the mid to late 80s and early 90s. There were other desks, so don't think that there weren't competitors. There were lots of other desks, and some of them were super fine and some of them were valued over the SSL, but the SSL became very famous and it kind of ended up defining the definition of what a mixing desk looked like and did. So you've got gains on top, so you can set your main levels. You can control what comes first. We're not going to get into that at the moment. It does have a compressor built in, so before you think, oh, but there's no compressor, you've got a compressor built in, and it's got the options between RMS and peak, and it has actually a fine compressor when you learn to work with it the way that it works. And the way that it works is really functional for this kind of stuff. There is a noise gate. You've got EQ. I love this EQ in the sense that it's very visual. There isn't a standalone VST type EQ inside this version, the free version of Reason, and no biggie because we'll come back to that later. But the EQ inside the desk is brilliant for when it's designed to be used, which is when you are mixing. Yes, it's still fine for sound sculpting, but I always leave that for when it matters, which is in the mix. You've got 8 sends, so we can create a send and send stuff off to it. Again, we will come back to that. And our masters and our outputs. I will create a master section, which means that when I've got my rack open, I can click on something, I can click on that and see my master section. Brilliant. That gives me some basics. It allows me to manage my audio ins and outs. I press tab, flip to the other side. This is great. It's an efficient use of space in the sense that most of the time we don't need to see this stuff. When we do, we kind of really want to focus on this stuff. Now, for most of you, and this is really important setup, because while you can get away with that, setting this up properly, it will limit the way your mixer works and limit your ability to do some things you really should do. And remember, things that you miss out on, that you don't do, cause you problems later, and you probably don't even realize why. I will not take the master out to the main outs. I will take control room out. Now remember, we're in a digital world here. Whatever we put into this comes out of this. The only changes being made are the ones that we make. There is essentially no such thing as bad quality in digital. Once it's there and it's a pile of ones and zeros, it's the same ones and zeros from beginning to end, bar the alteration of said ones and zeros we create. So by using the control room out, we've now got the ability to use all the features of our mixer. Alrighty, so we've got MIDI focus will follow whatever you've chosen. So now we've got a synth. We've got a wavetable thing, pretty standard wavetable oscillator. We've then got basic other formats. So the things that, if you're just after synth stuff, Juno 106, Jupiter 80 kind of stuff, you're going to want this one for sine, triangle, and saw. The moment that I start wanting to get into squares and pulses, I will come over here. 50% is a square. And that is pulse width modulation. It's defaulted to envelope 1. That's kind of a weird setting. Some of the defaults in Europa are a little strange. But you can either create a new shape or dial up a new shape. Seeing it's pulse width modulation, then we probably want a triangle wave rather than a sine wave. And we can make it bipolar, because you see at the moment it's only going half. That's not all the fun we want. We make that bipolar. It's now going. We could use an LFO, absolutely no dramas there. It's just this is already defaulted. Brilliant. We can do all the usual things, creating octaves, detuning. You can do unisons, but unisons are boring as. So done. So done. Don't leap to unisons because they immediately sound amazeballs. They do. But you're going to set yourself up for a lot of dramas later, especially when you come to the mix and everything is over stereoed. Just yesterday, I released a video about mixing for depth, and a lot of that was about narrowing down stereo. So if you make the dumb mistake of going, everything needs to sound like this or more, you're going to have a lot of dramas when you come to mix it later. So I'm going to say, turn them off until they're really, really necessary, and that's going to be like several hundred kilometers past where you think it was actually necessary. If we want to filter things, because we want to filter things, these will seem like they sound different from other filters, especially those that claim to be all analogy and this, that, and the other. But you've got to understand how they work. I made a whole video a couple of weeks ago about how to make Reason seem like it's competing on an even playing field, or more to the point, how to learn to use Reason levels and what have you properly, because Reason actually defaults to sane and sensible ways of doing things rather than dumb things that sound impressive at the beginning, which is like unisoning everything is dumb. So, Europa has 4 MSEGs, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 has been defaulted, but you can change it to and being an MSEG, obviously we can run them, double click to create a point, kind of like a normal ADSR, or we can run them so that they do weird ass stuff. We won't get too heavily into that because we don't need to. This is all stuff that you can learn and largely work out for yourself by feel, not by like a little robot, because again that will shoot you in the patootie when you come to it down the track. So we've got sound. Wonderful. There are onboard effects. Onboard effects in Reason's synths are actually quite good. Not as powerful as using external things, but really pretty good. So you've got a fair amount of control. And again, just be careful with going stupid wide. You'll see that the defaults are not to stupid wide. And we have more control over richness with a chorus than we generally do with unisons. You see that adding unisons doesn't add as much as the chorus does. So it's generally one or the other. But personally, I'm far more into a chorus because it's moving, whereas a unison is not moving. Music is all about movement, what moves, what doesn't. So when you focus too much on things that don't move, you're taking away a lot of what matters. Distortion, personally, I think that should come before chorus because distortion will react more aggressively on a complex signal. Up to you. They are nice algorithms. Depending upon what you want to achieve. Most of the time, just distortion will be the kind of thing that you're after. Monophonic sounds, you can go hard. Polyphonic sounds, you're going to need to pull that back a bit. This has a tone control. It rolls off the top, 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 top. Now, Reason has a reputation for Reason sound. This is true and not true. There is nothing wrong with the sound of Reason, so the concept of Reason sound is going to ruin you. Therefore, you should never use Reason. That's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. But in terms of understanding that Reason's kind of like the NS10 of DAWs, in that it's just brutally straight out to the end. Right up the top. It reproduces all the highs that it can up to its band limits. means that adding in something that rolls a little bit off the tops, you know, your 16, 18, 20K, it's not entirely a bad thing. Because the reality is earlier analog synths often wouldn't go past 6 or even 8K. While that makes them dull by comparison, it's the reality of it. Part of that analog sound was the fact that there were just no highs whatsoever. So if we're listening to Wendy Carlos or I'm going to guess Gary Newman or something like that record, Ultravox Records, then there's a lot of natural roll-off on not only the synths but the effects that they are using. So using the tone roll-off is not entirely a bad thing. It will give you warmer sounds. So just using the flat, richer. The other things that we really want to do in terms of richness, and I see so many people don't do this, is to use LFOs for vibrato. Now the numbers in Reason for getting, you know, workable vibratos, as in not crazy drunkenness, are under 5. 5 is okay if you want a big vibrato. Another way you can pull that back slightly is to use the triangle form, because the sine wave naturally is holding the top and the bottom a little bit longer because it's slowed down, whereas a triangle is going there and it's more even across the board. Obviously if we go high, then we get not very nice at all. Let's just Control Z. Everything Control Z's in here. It's lovely. I hate some doors where they do and some where they don't. You know, it's not a racy song. Go look it up. Some girls racy. So now we've got quite a bit of movement here. And notice how it's become a little bit harsher, a little bit harder, because we've actually rolled off some of those ultra highs, so they have unmasked some of the mids. Insta digital synth versus ARP 2600. It's just masking that gives people the impression that Reason is thin and brittle. It's not thin, everything is there, it's just everything's there. You haven't stopped to actually roll some of it off. That's basically how the synth works. There are a lot more options in here, including quite nice FM, limited but quite nice, and wavetables. You can even bring in your own samples. It'll only handle one sample for the whole instrument, so if you're running your 3 oscillator engines and you want them all to run from a sample, it'll only run their same sample. And if you want to use the sample in here, then that's the same thing, the same sample. Yes, it is a bit of a hard limit, but nonetheless, it's an incredibly powerful instrument. That's how you bring in your own wavetables, assuming you're not going to use the envelope 3 or 4, which you can set up as... let's make sure we end. As you see, it's following these 2 shapes. So you can make any 2 shapes you want and morph between them. That's really powerful. If you know how to make the shape of a bass guitar, then you can set the plucky shape and the fading off shape where it gets softer and morph between the 2, and you will be surprised how good it can get. Okay, it's not a sample, but you'll be surprised how good it can get. Okay, wonderful. That's largely it for our instrument. Let's go to a slightly less distressing form. Now, effects. Let's make sure that I don't use anything that we are not allowed to use. Scream. the echo is what we will use. So we can use screen there, or we can look for it in here, or we can type some of the words and letters. Now this is a distortion unit, so it is designed to distort. It will do things around that, a lot of stuff around that, but it is designed to distort. We'll turn that distortion off for the moment. We've got different modes and different functions. So the first 4 are different types of distortion. Very simplistically put, they map the kind of input drive that those sorts of distortions make, use, do to do their do, and also the overtones that they create. So some will create more odd or even overtones in different sorts of balances. Don't get too much into that, down the track do, but for now just understand different tones or styles will give you different results. So overdrive, straight out distortion, that sort of, classic guitarist DS1 pedal type thing. None of these are meant to be clones, I don't think. Fuzz, which is Hendrix fuzz pedal. You can do some really cool stuff with fuzz, especially if you pull its input right back or even reduce what it's being fed. Yeah, it's rather nice. But fuzz is a very high gain distortion, as in it puts lots onto the front end. So it goes straight into... It's wonderful for screaming lead guitars. If you like Motley Crue, if you know who Motley Crue is, then when you come to our picked leads, and even plenty of guitarists who we think of as being more gentle will actually use fuzz for that really driven, really clean, really intense soloing. Tube's the complex one here because we can change the balance of those overtones ourselves. They tend to be preset in the others, but more changeable here. So it's just smooth overtones here and getting complex as we go there. It's all going to sound grindy though, because it's a fairly aggressive form of distortion. Sorry, that was turned down. Yeah, how it gets thicker. Also more gnarly, but backs off a bit there. Somewhere down the track, if you are using this particularly on metalwork, on drums, cymbals, hi-hats, what have you, you can get lovely results with just a touch of tubiness on things. It's not going to sound great on all synths, it's not meant to, but if we pull back our drive, yeah, how it's just adding a little bit more. With overdrive, it does pull out a lot of bottom end, but this is not abnormal in guitar amps. It is merely the nature of the beast. If that really bothers you, put it back in. Now you're going to note there that it's kind of nasal and hard. This is because of 2 things. One is what I talked about before, that it's just providing all those overtones, all those frequencies are pretty well even right the way up to 20k. Not comfortable. So we can gently roll them off. We also could use this. See, now we're getting the kind of tone that we probably were hoping to get. Let's just give that a little bit more. See, really nice tone. Presence. Presence is a tricky one to get, but presence is a knob on classic amps where it gives you more drive in the presence range, the bit that we here as being forward, and that's in the mids, which is why a lot of early guitar sounds were pretty mid-forward. It helps them to cut the mix, because in the very, very early days, going back into the jazz days of Charlie Christian and the like, the guitarist was fighting against a whole orchestra. Only they weren't playing Mozart sedately, they were all hammering away, and the guitarist obviously just was nowhere. First there was the resonator guitar, and then there was the electric guitar, let there be rock, and they needed some way to actually cut through all of those instruments. So the presence knob might make it sound a bit horrid, but it gives you a lot of cut. So just understand what the knobs are, what they do, why they do it, and you've got great. You've got an EQ in the middle. Now you can apply this EQ to absolutely anything. You can turn this off. Say I was rocking my sound. Let's just... We've not got any distortion or stuff happening. Let's say we feel that's a bit... It's only a 3-band EQ, but nice. So we can get a lot out of this without even using the distortion stuff. Then on the other end, we've got this body. The body is actually an emulation of how a guitar cabinet works. It's really complex, it's really cool. Years ago I made a video about how to emulate guitar cabinets without using lazy, cheaty hack sort of ways. Nobody ever watched it, which was a real shame, because once you understand how it works, you can create any guitar cabinet that you want with an EQ. Free. So what this does is it adds a resonator. Resonators being really short echo delays with high feedback. So you can hear it's imparting a tone, which is what happens when you put a loud speaker in a little wooden box with or without a back on it. There's a lot of repetition and bounce of that sound. So this now sounds like a speaker. This doesn't attempt to emulate model X, Y, and Z. It gives you the ability to run a massive gamut of options. So reso is how much resonance you're getting. Scale, the size of the box. To be perfectly blunt, I've never really understood whether that's small and large or that's large and small. So just move it till you get the kind of tone you like. This feels kind of nice. Auto is a sort of auto wah, only it's not a auto wah. What it does is it simply moves our scale knob with the level input. So as it gets louder, it's pushing that knob up. Is it useful? Oddly, yes. So to make this seem a little less static, it can be nice to add just a little bit of it. You can hear it go wow, 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 wow. It's not a talk box, but it will give you similar sorts of results with a very high resonance. You don't have to use it. Sometimes it can really mess up a sound. But a little bit of it can be really nice, because what happens is the speaker inside that box actually starts to behave differently as it gets louder. So it's actually a nice knob to have. We've then got different types of bodies, which very simply put are changing the shape, the character of the resonator. That may be partially the length of those resonators, but there may also be some other shaping inside it. Who cares? Again, that's really beautiful for classic shadows, kind of tones for guitars. The later ones get quite bass cabby. So we're getting really, really chewy sounds out of this. Bear in mind I'm using headphones and can't hear squat properly. But don't underestimate the value of this guy at all. You can automate lots of things inside the sequencer, and you can automate a lot of things over CVs, which we will touch on later. And the next feature that we can use as an effect is the echo. The echo, as I said, is one of the best delay units I have ever used. I built a lot of echo units myself, and I still use the echo more than anything else. It defaults to fully wet on the assumption that you're going to use it as a send effect. Not a fan of that. I don't think it's a wise thing. I will put an echo on basically every single instrument in my mix, and each one is unique to that. I always turn sync off. Just about everywhere else they're like, use the sync button, because then you'll always be right. No, dude, you'll always be wrong. Because while you will be technically right, in music, technically right is rarely right. Which is why older drummers, up to definitely the mid-80s, tended to sound better than newer drummers. It's nothing to do with their age or their skills. Matter of fact, some of the newer drummers have tremendous technical skills, like they can play at absolutely insane rates. But that's not to say that Ginger Baker, who's worth looking up, couldn't play at a tremendous rate, but he played with feel. My fave of all of those, the older feel drummers, was Bill Bruford. Bill Bruford played with Yes and the like, but he could also play with seriously kooky, techie jazz people and still just somehow flow over the kits. Now the thing is, those kinds of drummers, Ian Pace, John Bonham if you must, those sorts of drummers, they know that you don't play in time like a drum machine. They know that you work around the beat, because that's how you get a rhythm or a groove. So if you go to the lazy option of saying, I'll just put on sync and make, especially the cliched triplet, which is out there, it will become so regular there will be no groove, it'll be dull as ditch water, and while you can say, oh yes sir, I'm perfectly perfect, no one will be very interested in your music, other than people in groups and forums telling you how perfectly perfect you were, but they'll never listen to even the end of your piece, let alone the album, or to actually give you 50 cents for it, because they're not there for any of that. What the times you use are entirely dependent upon the piece. So don't go setting too much in stock until you have a piece. Let's build something. So you see I'm double clicking here. I'm able to open up this. Whilst your end point is set a long way in the future, you can, if you're using your screen like me, just drag. There are two halves. This means that you can, it's a bit, tis what it is, and then that's for locating your play. Now you can record and play things in. I don't think you need me to show you how to do that. You've set record, you hit the record button and you play stuff. If you need me to show you that, it's a bit of a worry. If we're going to mask things in, we can double click and then change stuff. I can change the start, the end of my note, drag it around. I can also use Control and arrow keys. Control Shift moves an octave. They can be really quite useful. I'm a masser, So that's similar to being a person who writes notes on a piece of paper. You can also press Alt. You have the ability to change tools, but why the hell would you want to? Because you can use key commands. So Alt, draw, Alt, draw. That's gonna suck. That gets really, really fast once you're used to it. If I want to do something else, largely the only other thing I ever do is to razor something. If I decided, well, that note's just too long, I'm going to split it in half. So Q and R, 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 or Q and R. As you see, it's just changing those. There is the ability to mute stuff. If we highlight it and press M, it'll mute. M, mute. We don't lose a thing. We can just say, well, what happens if it's not there? It allows us to do not leave things lying around in your composition that are muted. If you've decided it's better without them, get rid of them. That's why God gave you a delete button. Delete them. If you're sending it to someone, like maybe your record producer, saying, hey, what do you think? There are some things muted. Which do you think works better? That's okay. But as soon as a decision's made, delete. Because if you leave them lying around, all you've got is mess. Mess is your enemy. So let's say we've now got a wonderful. Let's give this a little bit more. This is going to make it easier for you to hear. And let's just so now finding an echo point, I'll go pretty high so it's really obvious. All we're listening for is the echo. We're not listening for, is this good quality, is this good mixing? We're just looking for timing. Now that's perfectly acceptable. There's no one answer. That's kind of cool too. Now we can see, actually hear that it's roughly an eighth. But it's not literally an eighth. If we did the math, we'd find that we were so many milliseconds off. And that's cool. That's called groove. So that's perfectly legitimate. Then I would move to fully wet, totally ignoring timing. You see, I work in stages. Then I would start to set up the nature of the sound. Do I want it ping pong? No, because I never want it ping pong. Although occasionally I'll do something like that. Down the center. Minor. While it's tempting to do this, there's purposes for it, but generally speaking you don't. I'll turn that off. Oh, if you do use this ping pong, you're probably going to just want to add more feedback on this side so that it feels right. 25, 30, 40% will generally get you there. This is complex, but it can be very useful in mixed situations down the track. So we'll leave ping pong off. Also leave keep pitch off, because it serves a purpose if you're moving delay times and you don't want the pitch to go woo. But the whole idea of these sorts of echoes is that they do go woo, because we're going to use that. My favourite feature of any decent echo to apply now that's putting a lot more richness in. So not only is the echo that's coming back essentially chorusing, it's got movement, which means that sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes early, sometimes late, based around the default time that we've got. One weakness of the echo is that this is always done in stereo. If it ends up being too stereo in our mixer, we can simply narrow our width. But I use the stereo-ness of this to help build really rich mixes. We won't get too much further in that, but just these 3 tools alone, we've now got the ability to do almost anything you want. Now if you go, oh yeah, but look, that's just a boring analogy sort of sound. Yep, no dramas whatsoever. We'll get rid of that guy. What we're going to do here is I'm going to show you how to make it more digital. And I know all of you are going to go, why would you want to do that, Benedict? Because it's wonderful. Oh, and before you ask me, how do I make paint stripper sounds? Go watch videos on making paint stripper sounds. There was a video on Europa and making paint stripper sounds that came out. I don't do it because I don't like it. We could go to a bandpass, or I'm going to use the high pass variable slope. Nice. We are going to want a chorus because when we get into this sort of digital sounds, chorus is really important. Don't automatically go the lowest octave that you can. Okay. I'm going to get rid of that drive because that's going to be problematic. Digital synths will use a lot less drive. Let's just turn this out entirely because it's going to fight against us the whole way because we're doing odd things. So this is when bringing in these sorts of things become really, really cool. And we can couple them with filters. Now this guy, the MFB LP24, is quite Rolandy in character. So if you're going, oh, well, I want a more Juno, Jupiter-y sort of thing, flip across to this guy. If you want something softer, the SVP, very nice filter. That's giving us really nice, digitally kind of stuff. We may want to move to There's a host of things that we can do, but just showing you how versatile it is as an instrument. Yes, in this case we might consider unisons. And the phaser of a flanger. try in a tape, because the tape is really cool. Oh, I know what I was supposed to show you way before we start doing anything, because I have blown some levels here and I forgot. Bad me. We should do this first. We want to set up and make sure that our masters are safe. Now, if we get the M class maximizer. Easy to think, oh, they're jipping us on the mastering. This is a doozy, an absolute doozy. Turn soft clip on, because that will stop you from ever clipping. It'll stop you from ever blowing your masters. Turn your big meter on, keep it to VU and peak. Let's keep this running. A lot of beginners put only peak on, thinking that's all that matters. It's not. What the human brain works on is VU, a volume unit. LUFS is built around the VU concept. I just don't really grok it, and I don't cater to that obsessive need for things. If you work with peak and VU, you will never be wrong. Infinite, I'm not a big fan of holding the peaks infinitely. They can hold for 5 seconds. So that's your peaks, the one that's floating up top, and this is your VU, your average. So the volume or the level that people perceive that they are hearing, and the top ones are the top of the can. That's how loud it actually is. Obviously we need those to make sure they don't hit the top of the tin, because when they're hitting the top of the tin and clipping, we have problems. Splatsville. The most important number is actually your VU. Anyone who tells you that your peaks or what have you, or your LUFS are more important, no, your VU is more important. It's important to understand that. I'm not going to dig much further into it than that. We are also going to get a scream. We can choose where we want to put it. We can choose if we want to replace. Let's for the moment put it after, because I don't actually want it there. So I don't want to do that. Let's put this back into play again. Sounds awful. We just want to be across onto tape. Now I will strongly suggest set to 16 and 110 on the other side. Set that to top speed, so in other words no filtering going on at all. And this is a kind of a compressor. It's a compressor that's set up to work the way that most people try to work compressors, and is designed to emulate the soaking up that tape does, particularly of very fast transients. So if you turn it up stupid high, excuse me, with this we're not going to notice a difference. You'll notice the whole level just sort of comes down and it feels very crushed. But if you put a little bit on, with this material, we're probably not going to notice any differences at all, but any fast transients will just get absorbed more than anything else. Now, our soft clipper is far more important than our limiter. Our soft clipper hacks things off the top. That's a hard clipper. If we set this to 0, it's a hard clipper. Anything that goes over 0, you shall not pass. It just gets hacked off. And at that point that it hacks off, we've now created a square edge, and square edges sound hard. It will give you extra brightness, but it will not sound good. So the default is a half fully soft, so it burrs that edge. So as something starts to go over or comes close, it starts to edge it off. So rather than hacking it off, it sort of says, look, we'll smooth this off, we will bevel this off. You know, we'll get your nail file out and do it softly, so it's smooth rather than ragged. Soft clip gives you some of the advantages of that brightness that you get from clipping, but this soft clipper is very intelligently made from way back when, early 2000s, that people are still fussing around, is nothing passes it. I don't get the idea of clippers that allow things past. What's the point of that? No, you shall not pass. Oh no, just, it's all right, you can sneak by. That would have made a really bad movie. Default at 64, you're perfectly safe there. You're also perfectly safe as long as you're not running stupid levels, and you should never be running stupid levels. into it, you'll also be fine with 32. We'll leave 64, so we can throw stupid amounts at it. I can't do that, and it will still deal with it. Limiter, leave your 4 milliseconds look ahead off. Limiters you want to have as little to do with as possible. They are a really hyper-aggressive compressor, and all they do is flatten things. And while you might think, oh, but that's good, I can make it louder, all you're doing is making it sound flatter. You want something that's exciting. Dial up on YouTube the band's A Big Country in a Big Country. That's exciting. It's not loud. That's exciting. Similar one being Asia's Heat of the Moment. It's the heat of the moment. That song's like... It's actually quite quiet. You want excitement, which comes from composition and mixing, not volume, because that comes from incompetence and doing it wrong. And you'll always struggle, and you will push further into why you're wrong to try to solve why you're wrong, and then wonder why you can never fix it. You know, it's like beating your wife, and when she says, please don't beat me, you beat her again. Does she love you more now, buddy? Try being nice to her. So personally, I keep it on mid with a fast release, and when I'm finally mastering something, this will just flick. The first thing, any more than that, I keep a VU of around 0 or minus 12 being the same level, and my peaks, well, they can be anywhere around here. I'm not looking for 0 as a peak number because the peak's irrelevant, and depending on how fast your meters are moving. So I remember somebody once picking on me going, why are your peaks at minus 3? And it's like, dude, if you actually watch the video, you'd see that I spoke about keeping my VUs at around minus 12. That's a healthy number of LUFs too, in case you care. So we've now got, before we start making any sounds, which I did say before and then totally forgot to do, so that we had some sounds to see, we've now got something to make sure that we can't blow our levels. I will never be mixing into this. I will actually have this off. This will be on like this, but if I see this is doing any work, bad Benedict. Do not mix into limiters or compressors, because you will not get a mix that works, because the moment you turn it off, not only will you be blowing your levels, which means you're in trouble already, your mix is broken, but you'll find that the balance you thought you had suddenly goes, you know, it's like emptying your kid's drawer on the floor. You do it because there is no order and they need to start again. There is no point at which their shuffling things inside the drawer is actually going to make nice tidily folded underpants. Never. So you tip it on the floor. So you will find that your limiter fools you as to what you're doing, and meanwhile the drawer is a mess. So don't mix into this. Pull your levels down, which means pull them down at the instruments, not pulling them down at the masters. If you are looking at your mix and you know that it's clipping and what have you, let's again just get some level in here, and you go, oh no, that's too stupid loud, I'm clipping and doing this. No, that's a mistake. See, I'll always leave that right at the top, at 0. If everything's too loud, and I actually suspect that sound is too loud, then I'll pull it back at the gain. If it is coming in too loud, and I'm just going to push that so that we can push this, I will then use a compressinator. And we came with a really nice one, but it just behaves a little different to what you think. We'll turn it on. We see we're getting a little bit of compression. This is already set to a threshold of minus 26-ish. Around 24, 26 is the number that we generally look at when approaching things this way. We take our ratio and we just push it up until we get the kind of compression that we need. Not the right numbers, because there's no such effing number as the right number. There is what feels right. So we push that up, and we also look at our release times. If they're too short, we might pump. If they're too long, we'll get a lot more compression, but they'll be more even. So let's turn this back where it was. So already you might hopefully notice that that point where we get to the higher notes towards the end, it was starting to get a little... We've now just beveled them off. We've smoothed them. So the volume that the listener hears or feels is more even. And that will naturally have rolled off some of the highs as well, so they have gotten pushed down in the process. That is good compression. Now that's what's called an RMS compressor. It is running slow. So RMS and VU being not the same, but effectively kind of interchangeable. So it's working on the kind of numbers I was talking about before, that sort of 0 VU or -12. It's working like that. So it's slow and it works how the human brain feels sound. You can move it into a peak mode, which will give you more compression, but I don't like it that much. It has its purposes. You've got to try and see which works best. Attack is preset in this, reasonably fast or very fast. Very fast, they say you can use for drums and what have you. I tend not to compress that way. Slower compressors are far better as a rule, but there can be situations like this where you hear that going to peak and fast, it really has put a lot more control on that. The problem, and the reason that I wouldn't keep going ahead with that, is because it's taken a fair amount of vibe out of that by just sausage factorying it. So be very, very cautious with compression. Less is more when it comes to compression. When you find that you're doing a lot of compression, you need to back out and you need to get with somebody who knows what they're doing and can say, here, compare this to what you had. And you should go, wow, that's actually more lively. And remember, lively is what gets people in, not volume. Alrighty, so there is your compressor. It's not in the rack, but it is there, and that is a beaut of a compressor. But working on the assumption that we actually have VST, then here is the one that I would recommend. Not one of 7,357, but the one. While there are different styles of compressors and they behave slightly differently, the reality is if you can't do everything you need with one good, well-designed compressor, and most of them are not, especially all this free AI BS that's coming out, they're often very poorly designed, then there is something wrong. You might move to a different style of compressor and go, ooh, I like what that's doing. If you know how to compress, you can then work out how to do close enough that no one else is going to say, oh, you used the wrong kind of compressor there, buddy. And if they do, punch them. Because they're not interested in music, let alone interested in yours. The one downside with this freebie is that it outputs too high. So the moment I open it, I pull it back to 15 on the gain. It's now even Steven enough. The way to use a compressor really effectively, artistically, is this. This I learnt from Stav. You might know him through, I'm not going to reach over, it's too far away, Mixing with Your Mind. I was actually reading his articles as they were going in the electronic music magazine, I think it was, here in Oz at the time. So you set your ratio to high, stupid high. It will sound like crap. That's fine. We're not listening for sound quality, we're listening for movement. You set your release to really short, much less than 10 milliseconds or 5 milliseconds, it's going to distort. You don't want that, so move it up to something a little higher if it's going to be problematic. And you want to let most of your transient through. Remember before I spoke about kind of squishing things? Now can you hear at this point, we're following the feel of the musical line of the phrase. We're over-compressing, but we're following the feel of it. That's good compression. This is groove compression. We can now pull this way back. Oh, my apologies. Normally with this you push up to stupid numbers here on your ratio. That's what I meant. This behaves a little differently, but you don't really need to use the other one. 4:1 is really aggressive. Then you just 1 or 2 dB is on average going to be more than enough. So now we've got a really beautifully controlled sound that not only is keeping its levels in check, but is really grooving nicely. It's flowing with the flow of the music rather than just battle axing it, because that's what most mixing ends up doing. So assuming VST are legit, VST. You'll notice I've got a picture in here. Click the screenshot button, it'll take a picture of what you see and put it in the database for you, which means that when we go devices, if we go down effects, it should be there. Why am I not seeing it? Oh, probably because I virtually never type things in. There we go. It's got a picture of it. Because it's VST3, it's got a little VST3 tag. If it's a VST2, it's got a VST2 tag. Just if you want to get into scoring to video, VidRender VST does actually work. Make sure you set it up exactly right. It does work. These are some of my own, so if you want to, some of these are free. Mod Delay is free. Others, like 4 lines later, are like $4, and they are designed primarily to work inside the Reason environment. They will work anywhere, but they will fill little holes. As I said, a lot of them are delay or echo based, and they will really add a lot of things for you if you want. Like, you notice there isn't a chorus as such in here as an effect unit. Obviously we can use the echo. All right, I'll show you how to do that. If we were to say, I'm not going to run this as an echo, but as a chorus, we'll get rid of the unison because it's going to make it so hard to hear. We'll pull this right down in time. Initially we'll turn that off. We can add a little bit of feedback. Too much, it'll start to howl. You can use the diffusion, which just offsets all the timings so they become sort of a bit random. So now we've got a chorus, and if we go again, effect device, the echo, then we can have it as a echo echo. Chorus, echo. Every great delay line should be built to operate as a chorus as well. But if you want, then my own devices are designed in that way. Things like Sixth Dimension lean more towards chorus than echo, but it'll do all of that, and an echo will always work as a reverb as well. Speaking of reverb, we'll just minimize those so that it's a little tidier. Whilst we're here, we've got a track panel you can have open, and this is why I've got an ultra wide. Then we can create a send, add a send effects. What devices can we use? Well, we are kind of limited, but seeing we're after a reverb, let's be boring and use the reverb. So we've got to find the one that's available for you guys, which is this fella here. The way that's wired is effect send out goes to the reverb. The audio out from the reverb comes back to effects return. Now, this is why I said you must set up your master outs the way that we do. If we go to return 1, we're now hearing just reverb. If we press rack, we get to see our rack here. Let's turn that off. And we can open our RV7000. RV7000 was very, very highly respected at the time for how incredibly clean and clear it was. I will be honest, I've never fully loved it, but as a reverb unit, it is a fine, fine creature. I would actually build most of my reverbs out of the Echo, but nonetheless, this is a fine, fine creature, as I said. So we can hear a reverb. I will decide, well, what sort of space do I want this to work in? This is defaulted to hall, reasonable sort of thing to do. We can choose various things, including a spring, or this echo, which is really interesting. This is a great way to learn a lot about things. You can set a pre-delay. So the echo time is each of these taps. The pre-delay is we will wait this much time before we start your set of taps. Helps make a room seem larger. Also helps separate that echo a little bit from the core sound. All wins. So we can set our time. You can tempo sync, but again, really bad plan. You've then got diffusion, which, as I said before, spreads the timing of those things out. So as you hear, this gets softer, because rather than being ping, 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 it's ping, whing, 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 whing. And then spread is how far apart the variation in delay time is. And it gets rather nice. The one limit that we've got, and you can start to hear this ring, is that it doesn't have modulation inside it. If it had modulation inside it, I would be a lot more down with this. In full Reason, you've got the RV9, which is brand new, and that is a bit better in that sense. But again, it's just habit for me to create them out of Echo devices, which I won't get into too much now, but you can do it, and it's a really, really nice thing. But this allows you to see how reverbs work. And don't think that you should just sit on this on its own, because you probably want to get into doing things like EQing. There's something wrong with that one. In which case we get our EQ and we decide to set up how we want it to sound. And when we go back to this and put it back into the no reverb, reverb sounds nice. Now, this has been a lot longer than most of you want. It hasn't covered absolutely everything, but that's enough to get you started. If there's enough interest, I will continue with these. If not, doesn't matter. I've got enough to get you started. All right, get out there. You have a really good day.